The morning sun crept slowly over the horizon, casting long shadows across the dusty town and the wide fields that stretched beyond it. The air was thick with anticipation, carrying the scent of hay, horses, and the faint tang of metal from the blacksmith's shop. Today was auction day, a day when townsfolk gathered to trade livestock, tools, and sometimes the fate of a horse could change more than anyone expected. At the center of it all was a wild horse, untamed and restless, its coat gleaming under the early light, eyes sharp and wary. It had roamed the nearby hills and meadows for months, refusing to be caught, refusing to be broken. The farmer who had corralled the horse stood off to the side, a mix of pride and worry etched on his face. He had watched the creature's strength and spirit, knowing it could either fetch a small fortune or slip through his hands completely. The townsfolk murmured among themselves, speculating about the price, imagining what it would take to own such a wild, fiery animal. Children pressed against the fence, eager for a closer look, while older men exchanged knowing glances. Everyone sensed something unusual about this horse, though none could quite say why. There was a tension in the air, a quiet electricity that hinted the day would be remembered for more than simple trade. The auctioneer's gavel struck the wooden platform with a sharp crack, and the crowd quieted instantly. "Now up for sale, a horse unlike any you've seen," he called, voice carrying over the field. The wild horse pawed at the ground, nostrils flaring, ears twitching at every sound. Its muscles coiled beneath the sleek coat, a living bundle of energy and defiance. The farmer cleared his throat, watching nervously as the bidding began, a knot of expectation tightening in his chest. He had never sold a horse so unpredictable, so full of spirit. The auctioneer's voice rose again, inviting the first bid. The bid started low, cautious, almost tentative. The horse shifted its weight, sensing the tension, as if it understood that its fate was being decided by voices and gestures that it could neither trust nor ignore. The townsfolk leaned forward, eyes sharp, ears straining for any sign of how high the bidding would go. One by one, offers were made, each increment small, until finally a voice rang out, almost laughing in disbelief. $1! The words echoed across the field, cutting through the murmurs and the wind. A ripple of surprise ran through the crowd, and the farmer's jaw dropped slightly. The horse pawed again, sensing the shift in energy, muscles coiling as if testing the air for danger or opportunity. No one expected the sale to end so quickly, for the wild horse to be claimed for a single dollar. Whispers spread through the town like wildfire. Some laughed at the audacity, some scowled at the apparent folly, and others simply stared, captivated by the moment. The farmer felt a pang of regret, a sense of disbelief that this creature, so full of life and strength, had been traded for something so small. Yet, even as the gavel came down to seal the deal, the horse's energy seemed undiminished, eyes bright with defiance, muscles tense and ready to move at a moment's notice. The buyer, a quiet figure from the edge of the crowd, approached the horse with careful steps. Unlike others who might have tried to dominate or frighten it into submission, this person moved slowly, deliberately, almost respectfully. The townsfolk murmured among themselves, wondering if the new owner understood the challenge that lay ahead. The wild horse sniffed the air, nostrils flaring, ears flicking, testing this stranger with instinctive caution. The farmer held his breath, heart pounding, as the auction ended, knowing that what happened next would be out of his control. The horse allowed the buyer to get close, though only barely. It did not lower its head or soften its gaze, its spirit undimmed by months of wandering the hills. The crowd watched in tense silence, caught between curiosity and apprehension. A few townsfolk whispered predictions. Some said it would throw the buyer and run back to the hills. Others said it would be broken quickly, its wild energy subdued with patience and skill. But deep down, everyone knew that this horse was different. There was a spark in its eyes, a strength in its stance, that hinted at something extraordinary. The farmer handed over the reins reluctantly, feeling the weight of loss and hope tangled together. The horse shifted beneath the stranger's careful guidance, hooves crunching against the dry, dusty ground. The crowd held its breath, waiting to see what would happen when the wild spirit met human hands in a way it had never experienced before. The air seemed charged, a quiet suspense that made even the children press closer to the fence, eyes wide with wonder. Every movement of the horse, every step of the buyer, was watched, analyzed, anticipated. The auctioneer cleared his throat, sensing the collective anticipation. "Well now, let's see what this one can do," he said, though no one in the crowd had the faintest idea what might unfold. The horse lifted its head high, ears forward, tail flicking with barely restrained energy. It stamped, hooves ringing against the platform, a living symbol of untamed strength. The buyer moved in rhythm with the horse, hands steady, voice calm, offering something the creature seemed to recognize, a hint of trust, a measure of patience. Whispers ran through the crowd again. "It'll throw him. No way anyone can control that one. It's like it's testing him already." The horse seemed to understand the attention, muscles coiled, body tense, yet it did not bolt or rear. Instead, it moved in measured steps, eyes bright, nostrils flaring, almost as if daring the town to believe it could be tamed. The farmer watched in disbelief, caught between admiration and worry. He had sold the horse for $1, yet there was a strange feeling settling over him, an inkling that the price did not reflect the true value of what had just been traded. The buyer guided the horse carefully off the platform, steps deliberate and calm. The crowd followed, eyes wide, breathing shallow, caught in the suspense of the moment. No one moved too quickly. Even the children dared not break the tension that held the field in quiet suspense. The horse tested each step, hesitated briefly, then moved forward with unexpected cooperation, not fully tamed, but not fully defiant either. It was a fragile balance, a dance of trust and instinct that kept everyone on edge. As the horse and buyer reached the edge of the corral, the town held its breath again. The horse lifted its head, eyes bright and alert, nostrils flaring, tail flicking with the smallest flick of energy. For a moment, it was as if time had slowed. The wind carried the faint smell of dust and hay. The sunlight flickered across the horse's coat, and every person present could feel the quiet tension that seemed to ripple outward from the two figures. Everyone knew that the next moment could define the story, could become the tale the town would whisper about for years to come. And then, just as the horse seemed to gather all its energy for a sudden, powerful move, something happened that no one expected. Its legs shot forward, not in panic, not in defiance, but with a sudden, precise, almost impossible leap. The crowd gasped, a collective sound of shock and disbelief, eyes wide as the horse landed perfectly, steady and balanced only inches from the buyer's steadying hand. A ripple of awe passed through the field. The horse had moved on its own terms, but it had not escaped, had not thrown the buyer. It had followed a path that only it seemed to understand, a mix of wild instinct and a new, fragile trust. The farmer stood frozen, jaw tight, eyes wide with amazement. He had sold the horse for $1, but now he realized that price could never capture the true value of what had just been witnessed. The townfolk murmured among themselves, a mixture of awe, fear, and excitement. The children leaned against the fence, eyes wide, whispering to each other, unable to take their gaze away from the horse that had just defied expectation in a way no one could have predicted. The buyer tightened their grip on the reins, voice low and calm, speaking words the horse seemed to recognize, moving with it in a rhythm that balanced patience with authority. The wild creature was still untamed, but the connection was undeniable. The townsfolk watched, stunned, as the horse and buyer moved together, each step precise, each movement full of latent power yet guided by an unspoken bond. The air was thick with suspense, heavy with the sense that something extraordinary was unfolding right before their eyes. Even as the horse and buyer disappeared into the fields beyond the auction corral, the whispers continued. "I've never seen anything like that. How did it just, obey? It's like it knows something we don't." The farmer remained rooted to the spot, heart pounding, realizing that the horse's journey had only just begun, that the story of the $1 horse was far from over, and that whatever came next would leave the town and himself forever changed. And as the horse vanished into the horizon, muscles coiled, eyes alert, spirit untamed yet strangely guided, the town stood in stunned silence, unable to move, caught between disbelief and wonder, waiting to see what this wild creature would do next. The fields beyond the auction corral stretched wide and unbroken, the tall grass bending under the early summer breeze. The wild horse moved with a careful precision, muscles rippling beneath its sleek coat, eyes alert to every sound, every shadow. The buyer kept a steady pace beside it, voice low and calm, guiding with subtle cues that the horse seemed to understand, though it remained untamed, alive with raw energy. The distance from the town and the corral gave both freedom and risk, and the tension between control and independence hung in the air, unspoken but palpable. The townsfolk lingered at the edge of the corral, unable to tear themselves away from the sight. Their curiosity mixed with anxiety. How could a horse sold for $1 hold such power, such spirit? They had seen animals before, sure, but never one like this. Its eyes held a fire that seemed almost human, an intelligence and awareness that unsettled as much as it fascinated. Some whispered that the buyer had skill, a way with animals that others could not understand, but many wondered if the horse itself had chosen the path it was on, more than anyone could have predicted. The farmer who had sold the horse remained at the corral, hands gripping the wood of the fence. Pride warred with regret in his chest. He had hoped for a fair price, perhaps enough to fix a roof or stock the barn with feed for the next season. $1 had seemed symbolic at the time, but now he realized that the horse's value could not be measured in coins. The creature's energy, its wildness, its unpredictable intelligence, it was priceless, and he could feel the weight of that truth pressing on him with every galloping stride the horse took beyond the fence. The buyer led the horse into a narrow creek cutting through the fields. Water rippled around their hooves, clear and cool, reflecting sunlight in flickering patterns. The horse paused, ears swiveling, nostrils flaring, muscles coiled as if testing the new terrain. The buyer stayed patient, letting the horse decide each step, offering only calm guidance. The subtle exchange between human and horse drew attention to something deeper than mere ownership. It was an unspoken negotiation of trust, patience, and respect. For a moment, the wild energy seemed to settle into something fluid, controlled not by force, but by understanding. Yet there was an unease lingering beneath the surface, a tension that the townsfolk could sense even from the distance. The horse had been sold cheaply, yes, but the reason behind the sale remained a mystery. Was it illness, old age, a stubbornness that no one could manage? The auction had not revealed that, leaving the town and the farmer to fill in the blanks. Some speculated that the horse was more than just wild, that it had survived circumstances that would have broken others, and that its spirit carried a story no one had yet uncovered. As they moved deeper into the fields, patches of tall grass hiding them from immediate view, the buyer glanced around, eyes scanning for hazards, listening for every shift of wind, every subtle sound of the earth. The horse mirrored the tension, head high, ears forward, tail flicking intermittently, body coiled with energy. It was as if the land itself had become a puzzle, and every step required calculation, awareness, and instinct. The creek's edges were slick and the grass hid uneven ground, but neither horse nor human faltered. Their movements were cautious, deliberate, yet filled with a quiet rhythm, a dialogue between two beings speaking without words. The sun climbed higher, and the fields seemed endless, stretching toward distant ridges. The townsfolk speculated from the corral and the edge of the road. "It'll run back," one man whispered, shaking his head. "There's no way any man can hold a horse like that," others disagreed. "Not if he understands it," said a woman softly, eyes narrowed against the sunlight. "That horse knows the world in a way we don't. Watch him and maybe you'll see." Children clutched each other, pressing against the fence, while older men muttered predictions about fate and skill, instinct and luck. The horse paused again, sensing movement in the distance. A cluster of hawks circled overhead, their cries sharp against the wind, and a rustle of brush suggested a small predator or perhaps another herd nearby. The buyer's body tensed subtly, hand resting lightly against the horse's neck, voice low and even. "Easy now," came a whisper. "Keep calm." The horse inhaled sharply, nostrils flaring, muscles rippling as it decided whether to bolt or trust the stranger beside it. For a heartbeat, time seemed to hang suspended, the air heavy with potential energy, as if any misstep could shatter the fragile trust forming between them. The creek widened into a small pond, water dark and still, reflecting the sky and the distant ridges. The horse approached cautiously, lowering its head to drink, muscles coiled like springs beneath its skin. The buyer knelt slightly, hand outstretched, offering reassurance, a gesture of patience. The horse drank for a moment, then lifted its head, eyes scanning, ears flicking toward every sound. The rhythm of breathing and movement, of cautious steps and quiet observation, became almost hypnotic. There was tension, yes, but also a fragile beauty, a raw connection forming in the midst of uncertainty. Yet, even in these quiet moments, the mystery of why the horse had been sold for only $1 lingered like a shadow. The townsfolk whispered of stubbornness, of illness, of untamed wildness, but none could guess the truth. The farmer had his suspicions but dared not voice them, leaving the question to hang over the field and the town alike. And for the horse there was no such concern, only the immediate challenge of navigating unfamiliar territory, balancing trust with instinct, survival with curiosity. The buyer led the horse along a narrow trail toward a ridge that overlooked the fields, sunlight glinting off the blades of grass. The wind picked up again, carrying distant smells, smoke from a nearby hearth, the tang of wet earth, the faint metallic scent of the town's blacksmith. The horse flinched at each new scent, nostrils quivering, body coiled, yet it did not bolt. There was intelligence in every movement, an awareness that suggested it understood more than most would expect of any horse. It seemed to read the land, the dangers, and even the intent of the human beside it, making each step a delicate negotiation of survival and trust. The buyer stopped for a moment, allowing the horse to look out over the ridge. The land below stretched endlessly, fields and meadows, the distant town a cluster of rooftops and chimneys, and somewhere beyond, the corral where the story had begun. The horse snorted softly, tail flicking, eyes alert to every sound, every subtle motion in the wind or grass. It was a silent acknowledgment of freedom, of instinct, and perhaps of curiosity at what lay beyond familiar boundaries. The buyer's hand rested lightly on its neck, a connection more than control, and the horse accepted it, not as submission but as understanding. Meanwhile, the town below buzzed with speculation. News of the $1 sale spread quickly, and the unusual behavior of the horse captivated imaginations. "It's a trick," someone muttered. "Or maybe the horse has some kind of plan of its own." Children whispered about wild adventures. Older men argued about skill and patience, and the farmer remained torn between pride and worry. There was no simple explanation, no easy judgment, only the growing awareness that something remarkable was unfolding in the fields beyond their view. The horse moved again, cautious but steady, along the trail that wound toward denser brush. Each step tested balance, courage, and patience. The buyer remained calm, voice soft, hand steady, allowing the horse to make choices, guiding rather than forcing. The bond deepened, invisible yet undeniable, a thread of trust forming in the tension of every step. The wind carried hints of distant sounds, perhaps other animals, perhaps the faint clatter of a hidden obstacle, but the horse navigated with instinct, sharpened by months of roaming free, energy unbroken, spirit untamed. As the day wore on, the shadows lengthened, the sun dipping toward the horizon. The horse and buyer disappeared further into the fields, out of immediate view, leaving the townsfolk to speculate wildly. Some imagined the horse breaking free, running back to the hills with unmatched speed. Others imagined the rider guiding it calmly, a skillful dance of patience and trust. Everyone agreed on one thing. No ordinary horse had been sold for $1, and no ordinary events would follow. The air hung heavy with suspense, the kind that made every rustle of grass, every flicker of tail, every distant sound carry the weight of possibility. And even as the sun touched the horizon, painting the fields with gold and shadow, the story remained unresolved. The $1 horse, wild and untamed, continued its journey into the unknown, guided by a cautious, patient hand, testing boundaries, forming bonds, and leaving the town, the farmer, and everyone who had witnessed its departure with one question that lingered in the evening air: what would happen next? And could anyone truly predict the path of a spirit this wild? The wind shifted as the horse and its new owner moved deeper into the fields, carrying with it the faint sense of distant trees and wildflowers, the earth still damp from the morning dew. The horse's muscles tensed and relaxed in a constant rhythm, ears swiveling at every subtle sound: a snapping twig, the distant call of a crow, the faint rustle of grass in the breeze. Though it had allowed the buyer to guide it earlier, its wild spirit was far from subdued. Every step was calculated, every movement a test of trust and patience. The tension between freedom and control was tangible, stretching the thin line of understanding that had formed between horse and human. The buyer led the horse along a narrow trail that skirted a small grove, the shade offering relief from the heat of the late morning sun. But shadows held their own danger, concealing holes, roots, and rocks that could trip an unsteady hoof. The horse hesitated, nostrils flaring, legs stiffening as it sensed the uneven terrain. The buyer's hand rested lightly on its neck, voice low and even. Steady, careful, the horse shifted, testing the footing, muscles coiled like springs, yet it did not bolt. The subtle trust was growing, but it was fragile. One misstep, one sudden movement, and the delicate balance could shatter. Meanwhile, back in the town, whispers spread like wildfire. The $1 sale had become more than a transaction. It was a symbol of mystery, of challenge, of something inexplicably powerful. Some townsfolk claimed the horse had a reputation, rumors of strength, speed, and intelligence beyond ordinary expectations. Others whispered that the buyer must possess extraordinary skill, a patience and understanding beyond the average rancher. Children pressed against fences, imagining the adventures of a horse too wild to be tamed by conventional means. The farmer watched from a distance, unsettled. He had traded $1 for a horse, yet what he had really done was release a story into the world, one that no one could control. The buyer slowed as they reached a small clearing bordered by dense shrubs. The horse's ears twitched, nostrils flaring, muscles coiled as if ready to spring at any threat. The clearing was wide enough to run, yet narrow enough to feel exposed, a space where instinct and curiosity collided. The horse pawed at the ground, eyes darting, nostrils quivering, sensing both the safety offered by the buyer and the risk of unfamiliar territory. The tension in its body mirrored the silent anticipation of the buyer, each waiting for the other to act, yet neither breaking the fragile rhythm that had formed. Suddenly, a rustling in the brush caught the horse's attention. Its body stiffened, tail flicking sharply, ears swiveling toward the sound. The buyer remained calm, voice soft but firm. Easy, just watch. The horse sniffed the air, muscles coiled, every instinct alive. From the shadows emerged a smaller horse, thin and scrappy, clearly unaccustomed to human interaction. Its eyes held wariness, and it stamped the ground nervously, uncertain whether to flee or approach. The wild horse snorted, nostrils flaring, muscles rippling with curiosity and caution. The tension in the clearing doubled as the two horses measured each other, silent, wary, alive with energy. The buyer shifted slightly, hand outstretched, offering reassurance. The wild horse's gaze flicked to the hand, then back to the smaller horse, weighing options, instincts wrestling with the tentative trust forming with the human. The scene was charged with potential chaos. One sudden move could send both horses bolting, breaking the fragile control the buyer had maintained. Yet the wild horse remained, nostrils flaring, muscles tense, every sense alert. It was a test of patience, understanding, and the invisible bond between human and horse. Back in the town, speculation had reached fever pitch. "Did you see it?" someone asked, voice trembling. "The way it moved. It's like it knows more than any horse should." Another shook their head, muttering, $1? That's nothing. Whoever owns it is either brave or foolish." The farmer listened quietly, heart heavy. The sale had seemed simple, yet the unfolding story suggested complexity beyond his imagination. The horse had not only survived the auction, but had stepped into a web of possibilities no one could predict. As the afternoon stretched on, the two horses circled each other, cautious but curious. The wild horse snorted again, nostrils quivering, muscles coiled with energy, yet it did not strike or flee. The smaller horse pawed at the ground nervously, ears swiveling, eyes darting to the buyer for signs of safety. The buyer's voice remained soft, even, offering guidance without pressure. Step by step, watch, listen. The tension was palpable, a quiet storm beneath the midday sun. The field, once simple and open, now felt alive with potential threats and possibilities. Hours passed, and the sun dipped lower in the sky, casting long shadows across the fields. The wild horse moved cautiously, testing trust, balancing instinct with curiosity. The smaller horse began to mirror some of its movements, gaining confidence, yet still hesitant, eyes bright with tension. The buyer adjusted, subtle shifts in weight, a word here, a gentle touch there, maintaining the delicate dance. The field seemed to hold its breath. Every sound amplified, the rustle of grass, the distant crow, the crack of a twig echoing with possibilities. The townsfolk grew restless, some venturing toward the edge of the fields to catch glimpses. They whispered and speculated, imagining the wild horse breaking free, leading the smaller one in an untamed run back toward the hills. Others thought perhaps the bond forming between human and horse could tame, guide, even train something extraordinary. Children pressed faces to fences, eyes wide with awe and imagination. The farmer remained silent, torn between hope and anxiety, unable to predict the outcome, yet unwilling to leave the story unwitnessed. As dusk approached, the wind shifted again, carrying a distant smell of smoke and wood, hinting at a nearby homestead or campfire. The wild horse's ears flicked, nostrils flaring, muscles tensing as it evaluated the new scent. The smaller horse mirrored the tension, stepping closer to the wild horse for reassurance. The buyer's voice was soft, almost meditative. "Easy, nothing to fear." "Steady." The horse's eyes flicked to the human, then back to the clearing, every movement deliberate, calculated, yet alive with unbroken wildness. The ridge beyond the field offered a higher vantage, and the buyer guided the horses toward it, careful, patient, ensuring each step was secure. The wild horse's body tensed as the incline became steeper, muscles rippling under every movement. The smaller horse struggled but followed, guided by instinct, observation, and the quiet patience of the human leading them. The tension in the air was palpable, every heartbeat amplified, every shift of wind carrying the potential for sudden movement, sudden flight. Nightfall crept in, shadows stretching across the field, blending with the shapes of the horses, the buyer, and the distant trees. The moon rose slowly, silver light reflecting off the wild horse's coat, highlighting the tension and grace of its form. It pawed at the ground, nostrils flaring, muscles coiled, ears swiveling. The smaller horse mirrored each movement cautiously, yet more confidently than before. The buyer remained calm, silent guidance creating a fragile bond between wildness and patience. The town below whispered in speculation as darkness deepened. "It's like a story unfolding," one whispered. "I've never seen a horse move like that." "Or anyone handle one," another muttered. "What will happen when it tests the human? Will it run or will it follow?" The farmer clenched his fists, feeling the weight of uncertainty pressing on his chest. The $1 sale had opened a door no one could close, and the wild horse had stepped boldly into the unknown, testing boundaries, instinct, and trust. A sudden noise, a snapping branch, or perhaps a hidden animal made both horses jump, ears flicking, muscles tensing. The wild horse stepped protectively in front of the smaller one, nostrils flaring, eyes sharp, every sense alert. The buyer's hand rested lightly on its neck, voice calm and steady. "It's okay. Nothing to fear." The tension lingered like a live wire, thick and palpable, yet the subtle bond held, fragile, but real. The field seemed endless, darkness pressing in from all sides, shadows mingling with shapes and movement. Every step, every breath, every flick of tail was a test, not just of strength but of trust, patience, and resilience. The wild horse's spirit remained unbroken, yet a quiet understanding began to form, a fragile alliance with the human guiding it. The smaller horse, hesitant yet learning, mirrored the tension and curiosity, following instinctively, testing limits, absorbing the lessons of patience and observation. And as the moon rose high, casting silver light over the fields, the main conflict remained unresolved. The wild horse had been sold for $1, yet its journey had only just begun. The tension between freedom and trust, instinct and guidance, human and animal, hung thick in the air, impossible to predict, impossible to ignore. The night whispered possibilities, dangers, and choices yet to be made. The town, the farmer, and everyone watching could only wait, breath held, hearts pounding, for the next move in a story that refused to be simple, a tale of wildness, courage, and the fragile unspoken bond that had begun to form. The moon had risen higher, spilling pale light across the fields and casting long, eerie shadows that danced among the tall grass. The wild horse moved cautiously, muscles coiled and eyes bright with awareness, every sense attuned to the world around it. The smaller horse followed closely, hesitant but learning from its companion, every step a delicate negotiation between curiosity and instinct. The buyer stayed close, voice soft and steady, hand resting lightly on the wild horse's neck, offering guidance without force. Each movement was careful, deliberate, and the tension between control and freedom hung thick in the cool night air. The trail led toward a narrow gorge, the edges steep and uneven, rocks slick with moisture from earlier rains. The horse paused at the ridge, ears swiveling, nostrils flaring, tail flicking with restrained energy. The smaller horse trembled slightly beside it, pressing closer for reassurance. The buyer exhaled slowly, glancing at the steep path ahead. One wrong step could send either horse tumbling, and the narrow trail left little room for error. The tension coiled in every muscle, in every heartbeat, as if the night itself held its breath, waiting to see what would happen. A sudden rustle in the brush broke the fragile silence. The wild horse's body tensed instantly, nostrils flaring, ears swiveling toward the sound. Its legs shifted slightly, muscles coiled like springs. The smaller horse flinched, eyes wide with fear. The buyer's voice was calm, almost meditative. "Easy, nothing to fear." "Steady." The wild horse sniffed the air, sensing the presence of something or someone unknown. The trail ahead seemed suddenly narrower, shadows deeper, and the sense of danger sharpened with every step. From the darkness of the gorge, a figure emerged, rough clothing, a wide-brimmed hat casting a shadow over the face, hands gripping a long staff. The figure did not move quickly, but its presence radiated authority, a quiet tension that immediately caught the wild horse's attention. It pawed at the ground, nostrils flaring, tail flicking with alert energy. The smaller horse pressed closer, sensing both the danger and the protection offered by its companion. The buyer stopped, hand steady on the horse's neck, eyes narrowing slightly. "Stay calm. Watch." The figure spoke, voice low but carrying over the quiet field. "That's a wild one you've got there." Untamed yet strangely obedient, the wild horse snorted, nostrils flaring, muscles rippling with tension. The smaller horse backed slightly, unsure whether to trust this new presence or flee. The buyer's hand remained firm but gentle on the wild horse, guiding without forcing, voice calm. "We mean no harm. Just passing through." The words seemed to hang in the air, fragile yet deliberate, as if the balance of the night depended on their tone. The figure stepped closer, eyes scanning the horses, then resting briefly on the buyer. "Many have tried to claim that horse. Few succeed. You're lucky to have reached this point." The wild horse snorted again, hooves pawing at the ground, body coiled with energy, ready to bolt if threatened. The tension in the gorge became almost unbearable, a silent wire stretched taut between horse, human, and unknown presence. Every rustle, every crack of branch, every whisper of wind heightened the anticipation. The night seemed alive, vibrating with possibility and danger. The smaller horse shifted uneasily, pressing against the wild horse, muscles trembling with tension. The buyer's hand remained steady, voice soft and rhythmic. "It's all right. Just stay close." The wild horse inhaled sharply, nostrils flaring, eyes wide and bright, yet it did not bolt. The presence of the figure in the shadows challenged everything it had learned about trust, instinct, and safety. For a moment, time seemed to stretch, each heartbeat amplified, each movement measured with extreme caution. Suddenly, a low growl echoed from the underbrush, faint but sharp. The wild horse's ears flicked backward, muscles coiling, tail snapping in tension. The smaller horse trembled violently, eyes wide, ready to flee. The buyer tightened their grip slightly, voice calm but firm. "Watch, steady, don't panic." The rustling in the bush intensified, shadows twisting in the moonlight, and the tension became almost unbearable. The wild horse shifted its stance, nostrils flaring, hooves scraping the rocky ground. The figure in the shadows moved again, deliberate and slow, observing rather than acting. The wild horse snorted, muscles rippling, body coiled like a spring ready to leap. The buyer's eyes never left the animal, guiding, steadying, maintaining the fragile trust that had taken hours to build. The smaller horse pressed closer to the wild one, drawing courage from its companion while still trembling with fear. Every step forward was a negotiation, a test of patience, courage, and instinct. A sudden snapping of a branch behind the gorge sent the wild horse into alert mode. It lifted its head high, nostrils flaring, eyes scanning rapidly, tail flicking sharply. The smaller horse panicked slightly, backing against the wild one, seeking protection. The buyer remained calm, hand firm on the neck, voice steady. "It's okay. No sudden moves." The tension in the gorge seemed to intensify, a silent storm coiling in the dark, each movement amplified by fear, instinct, and the unknown. The figure finally stepped forward, hands raised slightly in a gesture of peace. "I don't wish to harm you, but that horse is remarkable. Many would kill for its strength and spirit." The wild horse snorted loudly, hooves pawing the ground, muscles rippling with tension, ready to bolt or defend if necessary. The smaller horse trembled, shifting closer to the wild horse, sensing the danger and the unspoken loyalty between the two. The buyer's voice remained soft, calm, steadying a lifeline in the thickening tension. The night deepened, shadows stretching, the wind carrying the faint smell of distant wood, smoke, and wet earth. Every step, every breath, every flick of tail carried meaning, weight, and consequence. The wild horse's eyes flicked between the figure and the trail ahead, nostrils flaring, muscles coiled, every sense alive. The smaller horse mirrored the tension, moving hesitantly but guided by instinct and the protective presence of the wild horse. The gorge had become a crucible of testing, a place where courage, trust, and patience collided. The figure spoke again, voice low, almost reverent. "Few can claim control over a horse like that. Even fewer understand it. Do you truly know what you've taken on?" The wild horse snorted, muscles tensing, eyes bright with instinctual defiance. The smaller horse trembled, tail flicking nervously. The buyer's hand remained steady, voice calm, guiding, reassuring, maintaining the fragile trust that held the situation in balance. The tension had become almost unbearable, each heartbeat echoing through the gorge like a drum, every movement holding the potential to shatter the delicate equilibrium. A gust of wind swept through the gorge, rattling branches and sending leaves spiraling across the ground. The wild horse shifted, nostrils flaring, ears twitching, muscles coiled and ready. The smaller horse pressed closer, trembling, body tense, seeking protection and guidance. The buyer's eyes remained fixed on the wild horse, voice soft but firm, hand steady. "Watch. Trust." Steady, the figure remained still, observing, a silent challenge and a reminder of the stakes that hung over the field. The shadows deepened as the moon rose higher, casting silver light over the rocks, grass, and tense forms of the horses. The wild horse pawed the ground, nostrils flaring, tail flicking, muscles rippling, every sense alert, ready to act, to flee, to defend. The smaller horse mirrored the tension, hesitant yet learning, eyes wide, muscles trembling with a mix of fear and instinctual courage. The buyer remained calm, guiding, steadying, a fragile anchor in the storm of tension that had grown almost unbearable. The figure took one deliberate step closer, eyes scanning every movement, body language, and expression. "This is no ordinary horse," the voice said softly, carrying through the gorge. "And you, whoever you are, have stepped into a challenge few could ever endure." The wild horse snorted, nostrils flaring, tail flicking, muscles coiled, sensing the threat, testing the boundaries. The smaller horse pressed closer, drawing courage from its companion while still trembling with fear. The tension in the air thickened, palpable, a wire stretched taut with possibility and danger. The wind picked up again, rustling leaves, bending grass, and carrying the faint scent of distant water. The wild horse lifted its head, nostrils flaring, eyes bright, tail flicking, body taut with energy, ready for whatever might come next. The smaller horse mirrored the alertness, cautious yet learning, following instinct and guidance. The buyer remained calm, voice soft, hand steady, maintaining the delicate bond that had formed despite fear, unpredictability, and the looming unknown. And as the moon cast its silver glow across the gorge, the story teetered on the edge of chaos. Every movement, every breath, every flick of a tail was a negotiation between instinct and trust, freedom and guidance. The wild horse had survived the auction, the journey across the fields, and now faced a challenge that tested every ounce of courage and patience it possessed. The smaller horse relied on its companion, learning through observation, while the buyer held the fragile balance of control and understanding. The tension had reached its peak, the climax approaching, yet nothing had yet been resolved, leaving the night thick with anticipation, every moment pregnant with the possibility of sudden action, sudden flight, or extraordinary connection. The night hung heavy for a moment, every shadow in the gorge alive with tension, the wind carrying the whispers of leaves in distant trees. The wild horse pawed the ground, nostrils flaring, muscles coiled, eyes darting between the figure and the shadows. The smaller horse beside it, and the human who had guided it through this labyrinth of trust and fear. Time seemed to stretch, each heartbeat echoing in the still night. Then, slowly, as if a quiet understanding had passed between them, the wild horse lowered its head slightly, ears flicking in recognition of the calm voice and steady hand that had stayed beside it. The smaller horse, sensing the shift, stepped closer to the wild one, pressing against it as though drawing courage from its strength. The figure in the shadows hesitated, then stepped fully into the moonlight, removing the hat to reveal an older face, lines carved by experience, eyes soft but filled with recognition. "So it trusts you," the figure said quietly, voice carrying respect rather than threat. The wild horse shifted slightly, a low snort escaping, but it remained in place, muscles still tense, but relaxed just enough to signal acceptance. The tension that had held the gorge in a near-perfect suspension began to ease, like a tight string slowly unwinding. The buyer gave a soft exhale, hand still resting lightly on the wild horse's neck. "It trusts, because it has no choice but to listen to the one who guides, not the one who forces," the voice murmured. The wild horse flicked its tail, muscles rippling, and moved forward with cautious confidence, the smaller horse following closely, mirroring its movements. The figure nodded, stepping aside to give them passage. "Few can earn that," the older voice admitted, and in that moment, the balance of power and understanding between human and horse became unmistakably clear. As they moved through the clearing and back onto the wider fields, the tension of the past hours seemed to settle into a quiet rhythm. The wild horse led with instinct, the smaller horse shadowing its every move, and the buyer followed gently, providing guidance without intrusion. Each step became part of a dance of mutual respect, forming the invisible bond that had been tested at every turn. Even the wind seemed to settle, rustling the tall grass softly instead of sharply, as if nature itself acknowledged the fragile peace that had been forged. Back in town, the whispers had grown louder. Word of the $1 sale and the mysterious journey through the gorge had spread. Some townsfolk had followed quietly from a distance, eyes wide with awe as they witnessed the wild horse's extraordinary composure, the subtle guidance of the buyer, and the incredible patience required to maintain such control without breaking the animal's spirit. The farmer, standing at the edge of the town with a mix of pride and disbelief, felt a quiet satisfaction. He had given up the horse for $1, but what had been sold was nothing compared to what had been learned, observed, and ultimately gained by those who watched the extraordinary bond unfold. As the first hints of dawn colored the horizon with pale gold, the trio reached a small ridge overlooking the rolling fields. The wild horse lifted its head, nostrils flaring, ears flicking, eyes bright with alert energy. The smaller horse followed, pressing close, now confident enough to explore and respond to its surroundings. The buyer allowed both horses to pause, hand resting lightly on the wild one's neck, eyes scanning the horizon. For a moment, silence reigned, punctuated only by the soft rustle of grass and the distant call of a bird. The tension that had gripped the night melted into a sense of accomplishment, yet the experience left an indelible mark on all present. The older figure approached quietly, now fully visible in the dawnlight. "You've done what few could," the voice said with quiet admiration. "This one chooses to follow, not because of force, but because it trusts you." "That is rare," the wild horse snorted softly, muscles rippling under the gentle touch. And the smaller horse leaned in as if understanding the sentiment. The buyer gave a small nod, eyes reflecting a mixture of humility and satisfaction. "Trust is earned," the voice said simply, "not bought or sold. And even $1 can start a journey no one can predict." The two horses moved together as the day fully broke, their shadows stretching across the fields, muscles coiled but calm, eyes bright, tails flicking lightly. The wild horse's energy remained untamed, but there was now a rhythm, a partnership that had been tested and proven. The smaller horse, once hesitant and fearful, had gained courage from its companion, and the bond between the three had become a quiet testament to patience, understanding, and the power of mutual respect. Back in town, curiosity was replaced with admiration. People watched from the edges of the fields, children pressed to fences, adults exchanging nods and quiet murmurs. The $1 horse had become more than a story of a cheap sale. It was now a lesson in trust, courage, and the unexpected results of patience and respect. Even the farmer, who had once worried about the value lost in the sale, felt a sense of relief and pride. The price of $1 had never mattered. The story, the bond, and the demonstration of spirit were worth far more than any coin could measure. The buyer guided the horses toward a small shaded grove, a safe place to rest. The wild horse lowered its head, nostrils flaring as it drank from a narrow stream, muscles relaxing with each step. The smaller horse followed, cautious but confident, mirroring its companion's movements. The buyer settled on a nearby rock, voice soft, words gentle, guiding the animals without imposing. For the first time in hours, there was no tension, no looming threat, only the quiet bond between horse and human, tested in the night and proven resilient. The older figure remained at the edge of the grove, watching quietly, a smile tugging at the corners of a weathered face. "Few understand that a wild heart cannot be tamed by force," the voice said. "It can only be met with patience, respect, and understanding. You have done what many could not." The wild horse flicked its tail in acknowledgement, nostrils flaring, eyes bright and alert, yet calm in its confidence. The smaller horse nudged its companion gently, as if affirming the lesson learned in the dark gorge and moonlit fields. As the sun rose fully, casting warm light over the fields, a sense of peace settled across the land. The wild horse and its companion moved together in quiet harmony, muscles rippling with energy, eyes bright, yet tempered by the bond that had formed. The buyer remained a steady presence, guiding without controlling, offering support without demanding obedience. The town, the farmer, and the onlookers would carry the story for years, a lesson in courage, patience, and the incredible intelligence and spirit of a wild horse sold for a single $1. The day's events also resolved the subtle subplot of the smaller horse, once timid and uncertain. Through the guidance of its wild companion and the calm presence of the buyer, it had grown confident, learned to trust, and gained a sense of place in a world that had once seemed vast and threatening. Its transformation mirrored the journey of the wild horse, not tamed, not broken, but guided, respected, and understood. The lesson was clear: patience, empathy, and connection could overcome fear, hesitation, and uncertainty, even in the face of untamed spirit. The buyer finally led the horses back toward the distant path to town, allowing them time to rest and drink along the way, keeping the rhythm of trust intact. Each step was deliberate, careful, and full of respect for the instincts of the animals. The wild horse's power was undeniable, yet it moved with grace and confidence, muscles rippling with strength, tail flicking lightly, eyes alert. The smaller horse followed, once uncertain but now brave enough to mirror its companion's movements, learning the rhythm of trust, patience, and guidance. When the trio finally approached the townsfolk gathered along the edges of the field, murmuring in admiration and disbelief. The story of the $1 horse had grown into something far greater than a simple auction tale. It had become a lesson in patience, courage, trust, and the incredible bond that can exist between human and animal. The farmer, standing quietly at the edge, felt a mixture of pride, relief, and wonder. He had not only witnessed a remarkable story unfold, but had been part of a living lesson that would be remembered long after the day ended. The wild horse, muscles still coiled with strength but tempered by trust, paused at the edge of the field. The smaller horse pressed close, confident and alert, eyes bright with curiosity and respect. The buyer's hand rested lightly on the wild horse's neck, voice soft, guiding them both toward safety, rest, and the promise of further adventures. The tension of the night had resolved not with force, but with understanding, patience, and a bond that could not be broken. As the sun climbed higher, casting golden light over the town, the story reached its natural conclusion. The $1 horse had proven its spirit was worth far more than any price tag. The smaller horse had found courage, and the town had witnessed a lesson in empathy, trust, and the delicate balance between freedom and guidance. The fields, once tense and fraught with uncertainty, now held a quiet peace, the air lighter, the wind soft, the horses moving in rhythm with each other, and the land itself. In the end, the story of the $1 horse became more than a tale of a sale. It became a story of respect, understanding, and the quiet power of patience. It reminded the townsfolk, the farmer, and anyone who witnessed it that true value is not measured in coins, that courage and trust can transform fear into confidence, and that even the wildest spirits can form bonds when met with understanding and care. The horses disappeared into the distance, strong, free, and guided by a hand that understood them, leaving behind a story that would linger in the hearts and minds of the town forever.